the appropriate place to start with this is just to steal one of your lines. How do we want to define this?
So the first one you want to think about is, for the purpose of this argument, what we are going to mean by the word pathetic.
Oh, yes.
So the word pathetic colloquially means to be weak, sad, just pathetic. Everyone tends to know what it means, really. I feel that's pretty straightforward. However, for the purpose of this argument, we will be mostly using the rhetorical definition, which is a bit older and isn't really used anymore, in that pathetic means to be toying with your heartstrings and appealing to you in a passionate nature.
Are you sure it can just
Sorry.
be an emotional nature?
Emotional is probably better.
Does it have to rely on passion?
No. I usually use the word passion, even though I don't like the word passion, to connect it to pathos, pathetic, connect it all into one idea. But it's more just pathetic means emotional appeal.
I love alliteration.
Yes. So the best way to compare it is there was a book Luke and I both read, or at least I'm guessing you read over the summer.
I read.
You read that one?
I actually did read.
Okay, good. It's called Thank You for Arguing by Jay Heinrichs?
Yes.
I think it's Heinrichs.
Yes.
But it's effectively an introduction to rhetoric, and in it he provides an example of when he had his kid, and super young still in the store, super complaining and wanting candy and all these things in the store. He turns to this kid, this like 7-year-old, and says, "Not pathetic enough." And in the story, he perhaps exaggerates that the ladies and gentlemen around him turns like, what? Why? How? Shouldn't that be the exact thing they're doing? But in the case, he wasn't describing his child's actions as pathetic in like they're irrelevant or they're unhelpful. Rather, they weren't toying with his emotions enough to get him to buy the candy or the toy or something. In effect, they weren't a good enough argument.
Mm-hmm.
And as we will see, it's because you can't form an argument solely on pathetic emotions.
Yes, so you kind of jumped ahead of me. I was going to ask the question, to what degree can an emotion be based on pathos or emotion?
All right, so we're getting real deep real quick. This is the last thing I wrote down, so that's fine. The way I interpret it is that yes, you can and arguably should use a pathetic appeal, particularly when it's something less academic in an argument. But wait, where'd it go? Solely relying on emotions to get your point across yes, it might mobilize your listener and get them to, in the call to action, get them to do something,
yes.
But it will never convince them of doing something. And the nuance there is being convinced or just doing it because perhaps you're angry.
Yeah.
So a good example of this, take a political advertisement. These beautiful things that just
works of art.
They're awesome to watch. Like it. Oh gosh.
If I see one more dark gray, shaky, off-centered screen with Mitch McConnell's face on it.
Oh, it's just, the trope is brilliant. And it's so obvious that only the most ignorant could not catch it, and I love it.
And since we live in 2020, of course, all of these ads are just reading people's tweets and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so ineffective. But anyways, the point at hand is that the vast majority of these will use some sort of pathetic appeal to try to get you to do something. A good example of this, I think it was when Nixon was running, one of those guys in the 60s or the 70s. I'm not great with it. But there was a counter advertisement against one of them in which, in effect, the advertisement showed this happy family living together and quite bluntly dropped a nuke.
I've seen that one
in the video. It's a great thing to watch. I think it's called like Nuke Girl or something. It's awesome, but it literally kills this family like instantaneously, of course, because it's a nuke. And then at the end of that, it flashes like this person for president, thus implying that if you don't vote for them, the other person will incite nuclear war, which there's a discussion we had about if that was true or not, but what was so controversial about it was that there was no argumentative substance to it. It entirely was playing on the emotions of trying to get you to feel...
Specifically the emotion of fear.
Yes, it wanted you to be afraid for your family and for your safety. But yes, that advertisement may have mobilized its viewers to vote for that individual to avoid such an outcome, but it did not convince them to vote for that person.
No. So,
on a principle level.
I would take a slightly different opinion, and this is more of an idealist type of argument, whereas if we lived in a perfect world, this would be how things would work, but I would say in a perfect world, using emotion as part of an argument is almost entirely manipulative.
Yeah, by definition, that's the purpose of it, is to be manipulative.
Because, by definition, it is not logos. It is not logical. There's no substance, no reason. I'm trying to define it without using words like reasoning or reason or logic.
Right.
But there is no way, because that's what it's lacking, and that's what you need for an argument.
All effective arguments that convince or persuade someone to do something on a principle level require logos. You can argue if vaccines cause things. You can argue that on a logos position. There's very limited evidence, if any, actually, that would suggest certain things, but that would be a much more compelling argument than... Well, hold on. That would be a more effective and better reasoned argument than if you were to do it solely on the don't get your kids vaccinated because they're going to get this disease principle. Because then it's just a notion of, again, fear is the most common one.
I almost want to talk about logos because that's more interesting.
Yes. And the reason I hesitated there when referring to logos as effective was because, unfortunately...
It's not more effective.
It's not anymore. And it may just be that I happen to see more of the I'm doing this because I'm feeling this as opposed to I'm doing this because I'm convinced by this. But you vastly see many more instances where people do things because of a pathetic appeal. As opposed... The best example of this is the presidential election, which just occurred. Either side, if you ask who they voted for, regardless of who they decided, most of the time they will say because they didn't want the other individual.
Yeah.
Or because they disliked the other individual or felt a certain way about the candidate they selected. Instead of, I agreed with their principles, or I agreed with things they wanted to get done.
It's almost like we have a system that kind of encourages that. Throwback to episode 14. So where are we going?
You just shut down over there.
What do you mean?
Luke here was laughing, and then we made eye contact again, and he flat-faced. All right.
I can only fake laughter for so long.
Tell me I'm funny. Tell me I'm funny. So next up, let's see. Well, we kind of covered it, but what are the purposes of employing a pathetic appeal?
For the reason that humans are not completely logical creatures, and for that reason, pathos is effective. While it can't convince someone of what you're saying, it certainly mobilizes them and can make them sympathize with what you're saying, even if what you're saying is completely logically faulty. If they think you're coming from a position of caring about them, or from a place of being disadvantaged, or if you if your, I was going to say character, but that's a completely different one.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that one.
If you make them feel a certain way about you, it can be more effective than even the most bulletproof logical reasoning.
Mm-hmm. Which is why you see arguments such as the notorious anti-vaccination movement withstand and surprisingly grow in some cases amidst an incredible plethora of evidence contrary to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because that plethora lacks the emotional appeal. It's funny.
So should we get into the character stuff?
Yes, I think we probably
should
for the listener define, like, go through all three of them.
Okay.
At least minimally, and then come back through. Okay. I think.
So you've heard us refer to pathos, sometimes called pathos, and I hope by this time you've grasped somewhat what that means. It's essentially argument from emotion, using emotional appeals in your argument. Then the next one is logos, which you've also heard us mention. This is logic, again the alliteration. It employs reasoning, and I want to get into that because there are different ways to use logos, and logos does not always mean correct, because you can have flawed reasoning, hence fallacy, hence the argumentative fallacies. And then the third one is ethos, or ethos, or athos, which is argument from authority or character, which I think it's kind of impossible to separate this one completely from pathos, for reasons we will discuss now.
The most concise way that I understood and first learned all three of them was pathos was a pathetic appeal, logos was a logical appeal, and ethos was a authority appeal or a position appeal. Things like you trust a scientist's opinion more than you trust Facebook mom scientists. Although there's a discussion to be had about if you should trust all scientists, but we'll come back to that.
Can we just do that now?
Yeah, I think we both did, though. We're gonna go on to this later, and then left it, and I didn't have anything. So this is the slightly hot take that I'll place here. While yes, you should accept and admire the opinions of those with greater education and those that have experience in something. So when it comes to something like health, discussing it with a particular type of doctor. When it comes to historical analysis, discussing it with a historian and not this person. Things like that. You want an expert for that. Well, that is probably the best word. However, the issue comes in when you only decide things based on their positions. In other words, taking who's correct by the higher chair or the higher seat.
Yes. And the issue I have a lot of times with people either citing themselves as experts or citing someone else as an expert who said something is anyone who has that authority, that you can use them as an authoritative source on something. They are that way because they have the knowledge to logically lay out why they hold a certain position on something. They might be a scientific expert, and they would be able to, even if you didn't completely understand it, they would be able to logically explain their findings to you. Which, in a perfect world, we would just be able to trust that because everyone would be genuine and
telling the truth and not biased in certain ways. But
but unfortunately, we're probably forced to ask more, ask for logos, even when we have an authoritative source to look towards. And theoretically, that's not a huge issue because they should be able to provide that.
In fact, I would argue, given the state of just human nature as it is, it's probably better for us to require that additional questioning and require the comprehension to grasp those questions and realize what needs to be asked. This is the difference between a hive mind and an ideal democracy. In the former, you have a group that follows the instructions of someone because they're the authority figure. But in the latter, you have a group that makes the decisions because they're educated. We discussed, episode 5, 10, 11 ago now. Gosh, so old. My beard's growing out. But in episode 5, we discussed the Lincoln-Douglas debates and how the candidates or the spectators for that event, in addition to just being able to withstand 9 hours of oratory, they would have to have an immensely complex understanding of the issues at hand and the nuances and how different people thought of them, which is arguably remarkable given the state of communications at the time. Which is why I bring that up to say, like, in that time, those individuals were able to fully comprehend this discussion and choose, ideally, a candidate that best captured their political beliefs in ideology because they had that understanding and came from the Logos background. But even then, you see, in that time period, you see the issue with slavery was fought largely on a pathetic appeal.
Yeah.
Yes, from the abolitionist perspective, but also from the slave owner's perspective of this is our livelihood. There's the really famous, a really famous book. I think it's like The State of the South or something, but it's effectively describes how slavery is economically
necessary.
Thank you. Necessary for the South to survive, which it kind of was at the time. And that would be a Logos appeal. But in the South at the time, a long-standing tradition was one of, if that fails, there's our livelihood, therefore fear.
Yeah.
So they are intertwined, but you can see how even then it was creeping up. Yeah.
And you might think, well, the only way to argue against something like slavery is in a pathetic way because it is something that you feel is wrong, but that assumes, well, first of all, if you assume no objective morality, then Logos doesn't exist.
Well, okay, there's like 3 things that we need to unpack.
Okay.
That one sentence.
And I still have something that you said earlier in your monologue.
50%, just hold it in the back.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I would disagree in that, yes, the anti-slavery position came from one of morals.
Yeah.
It also, those morals and the reason they claimed that slavery was unjust was through a logical argument.
I was getting to that. You didn't let me get to that.
Dang it. Go ahead.
I was saying that it might appear that you can't argue that, but especially based on the logic of the time and the things that we had accepted as axioms of humanity, the rights that we are naturally afforded and things like that, those were seen as principles that you could apply to things in the real world in a logical manner. And therefore, this is a completely logical argument. If all men are created equal and seen as equal in the eyes of God, then it is against someone's natural right to own another person.
Exactly, and that was the argument presented by the abolitionists, was if God, or if equality, then this, liberty, fraternity, the other one. It's about, that's why I find it really interesting to look at those Enlightenment period philosophers and some of the Renaissance theologians, because it comes from the pathetic position of God and all these principles that God set forth, but all of those philosophers and theologians built their discussions through argument and reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I find the most interesting and often the most frustrating conclusions to come to are the reluctant ones, the ones that the logic all points to. Because even though you might not want it to be true, it is by the logic
Mm-hmm.
you're following, which is what the Southerners faced at the time. Is like, well, that is the logic, but it's not what we want.
Do you have a personal example?
Do I?
Because you're like.
Are you thinking of my personal example?
No, you said that the ones that you find the hardest to come to are the reluctant ones based purely on logic. Or did you not have it?
I don't have a particular example, but just speaking from the reasoning that no one likes to be wrong, therefore if evidence suggests you're wrong, you don't like it. What I guess the best example I could use is when I'm writing a paper and I get halfway through it and I realize I'm writing about something different than I thought I was doing, or the evidence I collected is suggesting the contrary to what I'm trying to argue.
Oh.
In that case, it's reluctance to have to go back and change, but at the same time, if I was more invested in it, it's reluctance to have to concede my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. So what were the other things that you needed to unpack from what I was saying?
I think I got them all.
Okay.
I think there was one kind of big thing tied together.
Now I can go back to what you were saying about
Get the thing off the boiler.
The sort of culture of the intellectual culture of debate and discussion that existed during that around the time of
1950s, or sorry, 1850s. 1950s was not a time of discussion.
No, not at all. So I was going to make reference to something that didn't exist at the time that made logical thinking much easier for people, and that was, again, going back to episode 5, most people didn't have a face or to associate with the character of a person, or in most cases even a reputation. They solely had what those people wrote down and people's responses to those ideas, which certainly does not exist now. And this gets into one of the major issues of ethos when it is misguided ethos, meaning that person has no authority on what they are speaking about, but people will believe them anyway. For look no further than those Facebook mom scientists, or especially celebrities who make all sorts of political statements.
Active college students.
Might be the... Well, they don't have a position of authority, really.
If it's a group.
Now that's an interesting thing. What does...
Oh, here we go.
What does, peer pressure or something?
Oh, conformity is certainly a discussion
authority.
Of ethos. If you're in a room and the speaker says we need to kill all of these people and everyone around you starts clapping, you're much more likely to start clapping. That's why so many people went along with Mr. H and the Nazis in Germany during the 1940s. YouTube, don't demonetize us.
No, I can't say that. People will get mad at me.
The editor handed him a note, and now I really want to know what it said.
Show it to him.
This is how you get someone to want something. Don't show it to them. That's why people say, I have a secret. By the way, Luke, I do have a secret from you. No. No, yeah. we'll get yelled at.
Yeah. Most people like that person.
That is a good example, and I do have some feelings towards him, but we will not discuss that, unfortunately. All right. I even got into my everyone is Mr. H section of my writing here. Now what?
Are we going to get into comparing people to Mr. H? Because everyone's compared to Mr. H these days.
Yes, that's what I was wanting to get into here. So, probably the most dangerous part of applying too much pathos is using extremes as analogies. This is going back to that nuclear family, but not nuclear as in that phrase normally is. That advertisement forced the viewers to see the anti-candidate in an extremely negative light, if not a threatening light, which is why you get, particularly among activist groups and counter-activist groups, you get basically the tagline, "You're Mr. H," thrown back and forth. And there is a discussion to be had about using that as an analogy, because when you step back to actually look at what that's saying, that's should be an incredibly vulgar attack, but it's not.
Fascist is thrown around a lot.
Can
I say that word?
Yeah, that's we say
communism. Can I say Joe Stall?
Joe Stall. Don't demonetize us. We're good people. We don't support any of these individuals that we have discussed.
No.
But we do support our merch and our sponsors.
Please plug the merch and not the sponsors. The sponsor is featured on the merch, though.
And here I stand. Is it? Oh, it is. And here I stand on the precipice of deciding which one to advertise. But yes, if you haven't noticed already, we do have merch. It's really cool. It's really comfy. There's 2 designs out. Go check them out. And they're all in all kinds of different apparel. I myself and Luke also likes the long sleeve shirt.
Oh, I love long sleeve.
There's also a hoodie, a zip-up hoodie, a short sleeve shirt, a women's short sleeve shirt, a women's long sleeve shirt, all kinds of different things that you can try on.
Every combination.
Next up, socks. I'm thinking socks.
People do like them some socks with their merch.
I don't get, why is that a thing?
Well, probably because it's concealed and you can, be a secret supporter of whatever thing.
Okay, now we're getting into the Gestapo. Secret supporter.
I know nothing.
Anyways, we were discussing the danger of excessive pathos, and I think it's pretty clear in why that's an issue. Because why would you want the most fundamental arguments to be entirely argued on attacks of pathetic appeal? And furthermore, in the description, you noted the issue of ad hominem attacks.
Yes.
And for the listener, an ad hominem attack it's a fancy Latin phrase. It's just an attack on character. So it's when you, instead of presenting a logical argument, you attack this individual as they're fat, therefore
specifically on something unrelated to the topic in question.
Like, they're fat, therefore their ideology is wrong, which, no. By that same logic, you could suggest that Mr. H was, because he was pretty fit for most of the war, was a good... No, that doesn't work, does it? But that's there's a ad absurdum one, taking the opposite direction. I'm kind of ranting, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Would it fall under this category if someone was to say... I completely lost where I was going. Keep talking and I'll
Someone said they completely lost where they're going?
We were talking about ad hominem.
I'm just trying to derail you now, that's all I'm doing.
Oh, please stop.
Ad as in addition? Ad.
Go.
Go? I don't have... We've gone through my notes. Okay, alright, let's pull something out of thin air.
We can go to logos.
Let's do that.
At this point, it's kind of a discussion of all 3.
Yeah, you had... you mentioned the different types of logos. Could you go through those?
Yes.
I'm not super familiar.
This isn't anything I've read. This is something I just came up with in the last hour. But
you don't have the authority. I can't believe you. Unless you tell me that it's really emotional, then I'll believe you.
Oh, it's super emotional. We're going to talk about principles, statistics, logic, reasoning. Super sexy stuff.
All right. Go ahead.
So, there's obviously no like format for this, but I was going to make the point that arguing from principles or axioms is different from arguing based on statistics or evidence, which both of those would be different from arguing from personal experience or anecdotes. And you can see how all three of those fall under the category of logos, but they're all very different. So what do you think of that?
So the big difference is how they're applied. So principles and such are typically applied, and personally they're applied through action and through representation of an individual, while something like an axiom or an axiom on the wing, but mostly things like scientific theories and laws are taken much more on experimentation says this, therefore we can begin to assume, and with laws assume this.
That's a good definition of an axiom, right? Something that is assumed to be completely true for purposes of an argument.
Yeah, the phrase "to take the axiom" is to say to take this statement as an absolutism, even if it might be. Sometimes it's helpful to do so.
Yeah.
And we've done so many times to discuss things. It's helpful to do so in order to try and fan out the argument in a greater way. In fact, you and I had a really great discussion once in regards to free will, which somehow you coerced me into talking about it. But in that discussion, we took an absolutism that we both didn't fully agree with or fully conclude upon, but we took it just to run with it, and it ended up coming back around and kind of solving itself. And that's why that's done.
You're going to have to remind me of this conversation, because I don't.
The second time you made me do exercise.
Made you do exercise?
I say exercise when I mean a walk.
Oh, all right.
That one.
I made you go on a walk.
Yeah.
Ooh, scary.
Okay. Hold on. Walks are nice. I love a long walk down a short pier. That's a really nice thing to do. However, Mr. Trackman over here walks quickly and walks far. I'm not built for such a thing.
It wasn't that far. It was nice and nice and comfortable.
It wasn't that far. It was a nice temperature, and it was a good walking speed. I just have no
and it was like 11 p.m.
As all good ideas appear.
They really do.
They really do. This podcast was conceived at 11. That sounds really bad. Where were we? Axioms?
The different types of logic.
All right. You didn't see that. So, yeah, axioms tend to be a bit more in regards to arguing a discussion of morality and principles and such. However, they do kind of lump together with things like theories and laws and dissertations, if you will. But on the contrary, things like principles or values are taken as truths, usually.
Yeah.
And I would say one should doubt them and challenge them until they're confident in them, which is what I did with myself.
Certainly.
But in doing so, those principles function as a method through which you can build axioms. So, for example, if the 10 Commandments are our values or our principles, the axiom of this argument fell through halfway through it. Let's see. If our value is that God created man in his image, then the axiom you could derive from that is all men are equal, and therefore the theory you could arrive to is that all individuals deserve voting rights and the execution and so on.
There were a few steps.
Yeah, it's kind of a forced example, but you can certainly make a better example of it in that it's building one thing off to the next. Oh, I know.
Nice.
The French Revolution, the liberty, fraternity, and the other one, equality.
Yeah.
One of their values was equality of all men, right?
Yeah.
All men. But they took that axiom, or they took that value, and built the axiom of voting rights and participation in government and a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And the execution was through things which turned into the directory, and there's flaws with that.
Everyone gets to determine whose head gets cut off next.
Yes, but the intention was that it was supposed to create that, it just happened to not. But that's a better example of you can see the connection from one to the other and how principles can lead to axioms, which can lead to other things. I don't have a good word for that. Action.
Anything else?
How are you doing?
I'm well.
Excellent.
Always use well when someone asks you how you are.
You are not good unless there's an objective thing as good, such as you would have to be the objective good individual. Just say well. It's easier than and trying to address objective morality.
If you say good, then you are implying that you are a good human being.
I think that would be a really fun way to derail someone. It's like they say good and you retort back with, oh, so you must understand objective morality in its fullest and understand its complex relation with how it concedes to these different, like, just totally throw meaningless words at them.
Please teach me.
To overwhelm them. Like, that's what we're going to do. I'm gonna write a paragraph and memorize it just for that purpose. And you know you're going to get it if you ever slip up.
Any closing remarks about argumentation? Don't argue, it'll save you time. Just think.
Indeed. Just stop and think. It's much better. I would like to say, in all of this discussion about the danger of pathos and the danger of too much ethos, it's much, well, a balanced discussion uses all three.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably argue half of it should be logos, and then a fourth respectively should be pathos and ethos. And the ethos you should never say, rather it should just be presented as an understanding, unless you have to say it because you can't see them. Though this is the way I build most of my arguments. I try to, the best example is you open with some sort of pathetic appeal to get them interested, and you close with some sort of pathetic appeal to get them thinking. Usually a rhetorical question is tacky, but you can usually work with, well, we'll have to do a discussion
Or conversely, you close with a pathetic appeal to persuade them to action.
Mm-hmm. We should do a discussion on how to build a proper essay. That would be fun.
That would be fun, and it'd be useful.
That would be useful.
Much more useful than most of the things you do.
I've been doing theses for 17 years.
Teach me how to write a paragraph.
Teach me to write a paragraph. That's all I need. I don't know how to do it. But if you ever get stuck in a paragraph, just write furthermore and you'll be fine.
Is this where we end it?
You're the boss, man.
Oh, wait. I need to click on the right one. End screen. That makes sense. Yes.
Good to see you can operate it after 16 episodes.
Yes. We should...
I'm going to write that down because I want to do that. I want to do an essay one. Write that down.
I think it'd be... Now I want to talk about, like, why you shouldn't debate things and why you should take more time to think about things and research them because it's much more useful.
Change it back.
Undo the end screen.
All right, go ahead. Lead.
Well, I think in our modern society we have far too much debate, for how informed we are, in that we seldom have anything close to a full understanding of what we're arguing about.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, especially with the kind of unprecedented access we have to knowledge, literally thousands of years of...
All of human history is digitized. Thank you, libraries.
Mm-hmm. Yet more than ever, we ignore all that and assume that we have some authority to simply speak on an issue.
Yes. And I am certainly part of that issue. Well, okay. We'll come back to that. Put a pin in that it's my fault too, but we'll come back to it. So,
he admitted a flaw.
I have many flaws.
What a man.
Anyways, the reason I fear, and you should fear, pathetic appeal, the dangers of excessive pathetic appeals is because that'll force you to act on a short-term emotion. Emotions are temporary.
Am I supposed to finish the quote?
Finish the quote, man.
Emotions are temporary.
No, I said the first part.
But I interjected
No.
because I was...
I think we're off today.
Yeah,
Our cycles are off. Emotions are temporary.
Rhetoric is forever.
There you go. Your emotions will come and go day by day, and they will be influenced dramatically day by day. But the things you act upon and say and do, or your rhetoric, will remain.
Yes, you can never take what you say, or certainly what you do, you can never take that back.
Which is why I would significantly rather an individual who, instead of acting immediately when they don't need to, they take a step back and provide a concise decision that will cover something in the long term, as opposed to 6 quick fixes that are biased or based upon the public's reaction, which is exactly what politicians do every day.
Yeah.
Which is why I will never do politics. Also,
which is why public opinion surveys are absolutely meaningless.
Absolutely. Public opinion is a good way to get a quick heartbeat of the public. That's as far as you'll get.
At a single moment in time, usually from an issue that they're severely undereducated in. It is...
Surveys by nature are pathetic questions.
Yes.
They're asking you,
how do you feel?
Oh!
We're back on!
We're back on! Yeah! Yeah! Alright, we both just forgot where we were going. Alright, let's see.
We were talking about surveys.
Yes, surveys by their nature are entirely pathetic. But colloquially and rhetorically. Ha, get it? Because I used the actual... Okay, never mind. Just gotta throw the ball back and forth until one of us has an idea.
Elections.
Oh, no.
But they're, in a way, similar to a survey, elections are merely a representation of how people feel. Ideally, it would be based on what they have reasoned with themselves about which candidate is best. But because of human nature and the society we live in that exploits that, it is more often judging someone's character in a how do I feel sort of way, in a pathetic manner.
Yes, an election should be what the public thinks, but it's typically how the public feels, which is why those ads work, because they're just trying to get you feel angry enough or frustrated enough or scared enough to vote for this candidate.
And it works.
Because it works. That's why they do it. And that's what's fundamentally frightening about it, is because what that will do is cease the progression of an intellectual society. That's good. Write that down.
Write that down.
Write that down. But the reason there was so much intellectual growth in the Enlightenment period, the reason it is referred to as the Enlightenment, is because these individuals were constantly questioning things and wondering so much. We still have many things that we don't know, many of which are less apparent, yes, but there are so many things we don't understand yet. Look no further than space or the deepest parts of the ocean, or just things you want to learn how to do. But when the vast majority of the population does not care, there is no force pushing it forward. Yes.
Yes.
And the individuals that attempt to get that higher intellectuality risk, if not becoming popular or interesting in a pathetic way, they risk social death in academia.
Yeah.
Which is why if you get a degree in music theory, you're only ever going to teach it.
Yeah.
Because there isn't a field anymore so much for people to apply that largely, other than education, for other people to learn. This is why the only philosophers that exist are in academia now.
Yeah.
Because there isn't a function in, well, there should be a function in society for them, but there isn't one, unfortunately. This is why poetry has died, more or less.
We need to do art sometime. We need to do art and philosophy and academia and all of this stuff.
We have all of these like sentence-long ideas, and then I'm just gonna write art in our list.
Art.
Academia. That's one of my favorite words because it makes it sound so smart, but also represents the slightly pretentious nature of academia.
Slightly.
All right, I think
we're about ready to wrap it up this time. For real this time.
Actually, for the end screen.
So, thank you for anyone that has made it through this. We thank you for listening. We will be back next week. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Go eat some turkey. Or vegan. What do the kids do these days?
I don't know.
Turkey in a cup? Is that it?
Whatever the experts tell us.
Oh, look at that allusion to what we just talked about. How original.
Wow.
I shouldn't have bashed you. I do that all the time.
Anyway, my name is Luke.
My name is Andrew.
And thank you for watching the Two Existential Dudes podcast.